Hey guys, welcome to day 18, Paleo 0 to 60. It's our first day. We've made it down past 210 pounds, so we're in the single digits. Yeah, it's pretty exciting. So next goal, as you pointed out this morning, is 200. So that'll be might take a few weeks, but we can get there.
I will get there.
So today we're talking about omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids, essential fatty acids, kind of what they are, and then what you should be doing with them. So one, what they are, they're essential, meaning they're not supplied by your diet. Your body can't synthesize them from anything else, so you need them. You need to eat them because they regulate a lot of processes. They also are in the cell membranes. They're in parts of your brain. They're
just essential building blocks for much of the cell membrane structure in your whole body.
Yeah. So
they also are triggers for either inflammation or anti-inflammatory cascades in your body, biochemical cascades.
Yeah. We're looking at, I believe it's this article in paleozonenutrition.wordpress.com. She has an article about omega-6 and omega-3. And she uses the analogy of hot and cold tap water, basically hot being the inflammatory omega-6, cold being the anti-inflammatory omega-3. And basically you need both of those if you want to get somewhere in the middle. You don't want to just entirely eat one, like you don't want to just eat fish oil, and you don't want to just eat a bunch of omega-6s. And so the thing is, it turns out it's much easier to get omega-6s, especially in modern diets with a lot of vegetable oils and corn-fed, grain-fed meats and stuff like that. So what's happening, if you graph over the last, let me see if I can do this in reverse for you guys. If you graph over the last 100 years, from 1900 to current day, and so say this is omega-3 intake and this is omega-6, they start off pretty close, and then omega-6 goes way up, and omega-3 goes way down. And this is basically an increase in like salad oils, which is a lot of vegetable oils, canola oil, margarine,
all sorts of nuts.
Yeah, and a decrease in things like, I guess it'd be fish intake, butter, better sources of fat. So basically, we've gone from maybe a 2-to-1 omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, which was pretty ideal. I think historically, paleolithically, we were around between 1-to-1 or 3-to-1 ratio, depending on how much fish they ate. And so now we're at 20-to-1 for your standard American diet, which, it's pretty easy to see. That is a huge shift, and given that omega-6 regulates inflammatory processes, we're going to be inflamed much more frequently. So big part of the paleo diet and why it's beneficial is limiting the omega-6s. And there's some stuff you can do to help that, as well as possibly supplementing with fish oil or just eating more fish to bring up the omega-3. Because you want them to be fairly imbalanced, and the easiest way to do that is cutting back on the omega-6s because they've gotten so out of whack.
When you do buy fish oil too, you really want to buy the very best quality. There's lots of them on the market who jumped in there to make money. They have heavy metals in them, some of them, and they don't have very much EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid. That's actually the omega-3 that you want. And so you want to read the labels really carefully because you need a lot of that stuff in your diet. And most of them will tout having, a couple grams of fish oil in a capsule, and then if you look carefully, very little of that is omega-3.
Is the actual one. Yeah, that is definitely a good point. I think Barry Sears makes that point in his book on fish oil.
Yeah, and on his zonediet.com, he will sell you good fish oil. And there are some from Scandinavia that are really pure as well.
If you look around, you can find them. The best thing to do is to compare where you're looking. So look at the back of the label. If it says there's 1 gram in a capsule, and then look at the EPA and DHA in the capsule, it's usually in milligrams at that point. So if you have 1 gram capsule, and then you have 100 milligrams of EPA and 100 milligrams of DHA, that means you have 200 to 0.2 grams of fish oil versus the 1 gram of total oil. So that's 20% is a poor ratio. You want it to be like 80% fish oil to like total mass of the thing.
Yeah.
So omega-6s, what to avoid there? That's going to be all vegetable oils for the most part. So like canola oil. And if you look online, you can actually find like lists of kind of omega-6 versus omega-3 in a lot of different foods. So
on the nutrition site that Jeff mentioned earlier, the Paleo zonenutrition.wordpress.com, she has really nice tables in there.
Yeah.
And actually, you can dig out that information for yourself on the web. It's a little harder, but there's a terrific browser called Wolfram Alpha, and you can download that as a tab, as a an app in Firefox or on your iPad, any of those devices, on your iPhone, on your Android phone, and it will let you put in a food name like omega-6. If you put in omega-6 in steak, it'll come back and tell you every kind of fat that's in there in an average size steak and tell you how much there is of those, so you can see the ratio. And you can do this for any foods. It's one way that she put together this table. The table's handy because she did a lot of homework to put that table together.
So that's wolframalpha.com, wolf, and then RAM, and then alpha.com. And it is pretty cool. And so a couple things like that are high in omega-6. Grapeseed oil is terrible. Sunflower oil is terrible. Walnut and corn oil also terrible.
Rice bran oil
so
is
a lot
really
of,
horrible.
Basically vegetable oils and nuts are things you want to do some research about before you consume large quantities of it. So stuff that people don't necessarily think about but is important is nut butters. So almond butter, you can eat a lot of almond butter, I have, in a sitting. And that can be problematic because it's so, because it has omega-6 in it and you're eating a lot of it. Also,
and it's really tasty, so it sucks you in.
That too. Also baked goods that involve nuts, flours, so like almond flour. I don't think it's a good idea necessarily to be trying to recreate gluten foods like bread or biscuits and stuff like that frequently with almond or coconut flours, because you end up eating mass amounts of this sort of highly processed grain form, essentially.
Because it turns out that there are lots of things you don't want to be eating because your system doesn't know what to do with them, and they cause all sorts of havoc. I mean, there's not just the gluten. There's lectins, there's some of these other polysaccharides, and that really wreak havoc in your immune system and everything. And so if you just look at gluten, you say, I can use almond flour, then you forget about the omega-6s that are a problem, and so on. So you actually want to kind of get in mind what all those things are, why a paleo diet, a good one, looks the way it does, what you're actually excluding on purpose.
Right, yeah, and there's a reason we avoid typically processed foods. And so throwing them in every once in a while, there's ways to go. Almond flour is a good alternative to real flour because you're not going to get the really problematic stuff like gluten, but you are going to get a dose of omega-6s, so you're going to have to deal with that. Cool. Well, I hope that was somewhat enlightening on omega-6, omega-3, and there's plenty of research out there.
And if you find a really terrific document or site that you think is really helpful, full of information, would you pass it along to us, because we'd like to list it for people. We're going to have a nice thing on our site that actually lists really good places to go for information, because it's hard work to dig all these things out, and a lot of really smart people who care about this kind of stuff have done a lot of work already, so we don't need to recreate it. So if you guys find stuff, do let us know. Thanks.
Yeah. One last thing I forgot to mention earlier. All the numbers that you get online or from anyone for the omega-6 and omega-3 balance are going to be dictated largely by where and how stuff was grown or what an animal was fed. So these numbers are estimates. If you look at, if you grass feed versus corn fed, huge difference.
You'll notice if you do use Wolfram's tool to look at those things, he'll give a big range. Sometimes it's a range with a factor of 3 to 4 in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, just something to keep in mind.
And I was telling Jeff that when I lived up north of here in a fairly poor area, there was a guy on our road who raised cattle in a cattle yard, and he only fed them white Hostess 2-day-old bread. And they were some of the sickest looking animals I've ever seen. Every time I went by there, I wanted to get him arrested or something. But I wasn't on the paleo diet then, but I could clearly see what effect it had to eat that stuff, even on the cattle.
So don't do that to yourselves.
Yeah.